Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's electrical webinar. I'm Mike Buckley, Electrical Sales Manager for the Western US. And with me today is our technical guru, JP Emmanuel. He resides in the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast. And we have a special speaker today, Kate Hedberg, who has graciously taken time out of her busy day to show us how she uses SOLIDWORKS Electrical. So just for those that are unfamiliar with SOLIDWORKS Electrical, I'll do a quick overview and then pass it over to Kate Hedberg. We developed this to make system designs fast and error-free, right? So you have a schematics package that can do single line, multi-line, and you can do electrical, pneumatic, hydraulic, and PNID. It's full of components and symbols and wire cable libraries. You can do 2D layouts inside the schematic standard and professional. If you have a mechanical seat of SOLIDWORKS mechanical, you can do 3D layout and routing inside the 3D CAD system. We have a SQL backend on SOLIDWORKS Electrical, so you can do very robust reporting. We've got nice reports right out of the box, but you can modify those. We have a set of design rule checks that will help you troubleshoot your design. And also, this whole intent is to reduce your documentation time by half. And you can nearly eliminate human error as long as the data is correct in the database. And it enables collaboration across electrical and mechanical teams. So as we see the documentation process for schematics is you draw a logical definition, you select your parts, and you do your layouts. And then maybe in a separate spreadsheet, you do a bill of materials, a wire to from list, a cable list. And then you have to audit it and make sure it's all correct. So each component has a lot of data to maintain, like unique IDs, terminal names, manufactured part numbers, all the rest of the gamut. And this, if you have to do this manually with a generic type ECAD system, it's really easy to fat finger and mess up data. So with this system, if as long as it's correctly input once, you should not, you can reuse it over and over again without fear of not having it be accurate. And also, so what we do in summary is we make the layout and the design easier, but we fully automate all the bookkeeping tasks that you have to do so that you can move faster and do more throughput. We have a electrical library that's shareable by everyone. That it contains all the symbols and the components, and a lot of this comes out of our electrical content portal. And so the group can share the library, and when anybody puts something in, it's viewable by everyone. If you have 3D, mechanical 3D, the mechanical users can open and view a schematic project. You can make specific changes. You can route wires, and you can calculate wire lengths. You can also directly communicate back and forth with each other through an integrated chat dialog. And this is electrical schematics off to the left side of the screen. And here is a user, SOLIDWORKS mechanical user with the 3D electrical add-in that will facilitate the communication between the two. So really what you can do is either side can go in, open up the projects, and do what they need to do and modify as a team, keeping your design in sync. I'd also like to introduce, we have a new product called Electrical Schematic Designer. And this is a 3D Experience cloud connected product. And so it's in its early stages, we're still developing it, but it promises to allow worldwide collaboration with no matter where you are on any device you want to use, and it really helps using the platform. Helps facilitate communication and accelerate innovation, and helps you get your design out faster. So at the end of the seminar, we will show a couple of QR codes, and one of them is to a YouTube video that JP Emmanuel did, and he did an excellent job on it. And if you forget, just type in electrical schematic designer ESX in our YouTube channel. You should be able to find it. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kate Hedberg. She's been a good friend to the SOLIDWORKS community. She worked for several years for one of our largest bars, and she got her BS. Hey, Kate, how are you?
Hi.
She got her BS in electrical engineering from with Colorado School of Mines.
Colorado School Mines, yeah.
Yeah,
I,
and you've been a good friend to us, and you always show us different things. So I thought we'd invite you today and share it with the rest of the world. So you have the floor.
all right. Thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, so a little bit background of me is I originally got into SolidWorks when I was studying at the Colorado School of Mines, and then shortly after I graduated, I got a job at one of the SolidWorks resellers. And I worked there for 5 years, and I specialized in the electrical products as well as like dabbled in the entry level mechanical stuff. So yeah, Mike and JP asked me to do a webinar today to talk about how I've been using SolidWorks Electrical to do harnessing. So far at my company, I work at a defense contractor, and we work primarily in doing integrating systems for military applications. So far I've been working mostly with aircrafts. And while we do have the 3D add-in for SolidWorks Electrical, I have mostly been doing the work in 2D as we ramp up in order to do the 3D type of harnessing. So I'm just going to get into this project, and thank you guys for showing up. I appreciate it.
I just made you presenter. Hopefully it works.
Yeah, I think so.
Here you go.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, let's try to hide this thing. This is the hardest part of this whole thing. All right, cool. So I'm just going to kind of give a overview of SolidWorks Electrical, both at like a low level as well as more detailed information. So what you guys can see here is the SolidWorks Electrical Schematic application. Right now I have the project manager open. This is where you interact with all of your different projects that you have in electrical. So my company, we have 3 different electrical engineers, and we have a couple other electrical drafters. So SolidWorks Electrical does have collaboration capabilities, so I can see all of the projects that my other colleagues are working on. The way we do it is we kind of have our own installations that are separate from each other, because we kind of work on different contracts. Each of the 3 electrical engineers is working on a different contract, so we don't have like a lot of crossover in between each other. So we kind of have separate installations, but you can use collaborative functionality if you guys are constantly working in the same projects or crossing over between projects. Our workflow is typically I will design the interconnect of whatever systems integration project it is that we're doing. And once we kind of have that mostly fleshed out, it'll be broken down into individual harness drawings. So I've spun up like a sample dummy harness. So it's certainly not going to be functional. So don't have high hopes on actually being able to design something functional from this design here that I've built.
I was really counting on that.
I know, right? You're like, man, I'm gonna spin up some interconnect thing. And a little bit of background is I've been working at this defense contractor for a little bit over a year. So I'm still getting used to all of like the military acronyms and all of that fun stuff. So um, it's been kind of interesting because I'm designing stuff that I don't necessarily know what it really does sometimes when I start. So it's been a fun learning experience. So I'm going to open up this interconnect, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you around kind of like how I have it structured, and then add a little bit more to this design, and then pass it over and create a new harness drawing, and kind of just go through the entire workflow. I'd like you guys to, like, if you have questions, keep track of those. There will be like a Q&A session at the end, and I'd love to answer any questions that we get. That's usually more fun anyways.
You can type those questions in. I'm monitoring the back end as well. So if there's any questions I can answer while we're doing this, I will gladly try to answer them on the fly too.
Thank you, JP. All right. So in order to get into the interconnect, you just double click on it and it opens it up. Mine I have set up where it's going to remember the last drawing that I have opened. This is a pretty small interconnect, and kind of what I've worked on at my current role have been fairly small interconnects. But when I used to be a VAR at a reseller in my past life, it wouldn't be unusual to see drawings that have like 100 plus sheets in them. So while this is a very small project, I have seen them much, much larger, but I was not going to design a sample interconnect that large for y'all. So how I have this set up is you have I have a cover page where I just have some done notes on the page, just text boxes. One of my favorite things about SOLIDWORKS Electrical is how quickly it updates. So before I was a reseller at a VAR, I worked with a construction consulting company, and we used what I refer to as vanilla AutoCAD. So not anything special like AutoCAD Electrical or anything like that, just kind of out of the box vanilla AutoCAD. And one of my biggest gripes was pretty much whenever I changed something, it would typically, if I changed the name of a receptacle, it would show up not only on the schematic, but it would also show up in my panel list as well as like a bill of materials and all over the place. And so if I changed the name or the part number of something in one place, I would have to remember to go change that in multiple different places. And I usually would mess that up more often than not. So one of my favorite things about SOLIDWORKS Electrical is that if I change a property, anywhere that that's linked to is going to update as well. So for example, if I change the title of this project from sample interconnect, let's see where I actually put this guy. I think it's linked to the project name. There's different places you can actually link this to. So let's test this one out. I hope that's so what I've done is I've set it up where I didn't actually change it. Okay, hold up. All right, this is the actual name of it, guys. I changed the description of it. Okay, starting off strong. How I have set these projects up is there's the project name, which is going to show up in your projects manager, as well as you can see here on the left hand side, we have this different hierarchy of drawings. So where my mouse is right now, this level is called a document book. And so you can have a project name something, and then you can have multiple different document books inside of a project. And the usefulness of that is maybe you have multiple different systems that you're designing as part of a contract. You can have them inside of the same project. So for example, here, I think this is where I've actually named this drawing, where it's going to be sample interconnect system 1. That's obviously so beautiful. When I actually figure out the correct property of where that's pulling from on the title block, you can see that updates here, as well as when I open up my other drawings that should also have that. Here I only have like the harness number on it. So what you can see up here, this is the other property that's also linked to that. So if we have, this is what my company uses as drawing numbers. So the system interconnect has a drawing number that will reference, and then each individual harness drawing has another drawing number that's matched up to the harness part number as well. So here I'm changing it from being, X1001 to system 1 as well. You can see that that updates here, as well as down here as well. So I fumbled that a little bit, but the point I'm trying to make here is that when I do change a property in one location, it does show up in all other locations that are referenced. In this instance, I'm showing that in context of the title blocks. But when you're using components, it does the same thing, and I'll show you how that works. So what I'm showing you here is I have a schematic on the page. And one of the other cool things I like about SOLIDWORKS Electrical is that we have these origin destination arrows. So most of the time, you're not going to be able to fit your entire design onto a single piece of paper. Most people don't have printers that are large enough to do that. And even if you did have a printer large enough to do that, it would be just hideously unattractive. No one would be able to read your drawing. So what this does is when you have a design that spans multiple sheets in a drawing, you can draw your wires and then connect those wires with what are called origin destination arrows. And here I've set up my origin destination arrows is when I connect things, it tells me not only what sheet, what column, and what row the other end of that wire lives on, but it also, I set it up where it's telling me the name of the component and what terminal it's connected to. So here I have something that's called RR1 relay, and it's connected on terminal B1. And then when I look at this wire, I can visually see that, hey, if I manually open up the third sheet, so that's what 3 stands for, and if I go to column, or if I go to zone E3, I could visually find that. And then I can also tell that, hey, it's connected to this console connector P1 terminal 2. And that's all cool, but since we're inside of a computer, I don't really want to have to go manually remember all of that and go find it. So what SOLIDWORKS can do is if you double click on this tag that you see right here, it should take you there. So you can see it opened up my third power sheet. And it actually has the other end of that wire selected. So you can kind of barely see that it's dotted, sort of hash marked selection. And then here you can see that I have more information. It's saying like, hey, the other end of this wire is connected to RR1 terminal B1. So if you remember, that is that original connection point. So this is one of my favorite things because I get a little distracted kind of easily. And so when I am trying to navigate through a drawing, this is super helpful. The other thing too that I like about this is when you create a PDF out of SOLIDWORKS, it will actually create a hyperlinked PDF. So it'll be live. So when you click on this link in the PDF, it'll actually take you to the other end, which is just, it's my favorite thing. And that was when I showed my current management that trick. My chief engineer actually proposed to me. She was so happy about it. I said no, she's not. I figured that wouldn't be appropriate, but yeah, so that's one of my favorite things. Obviously, sometimes when you have to print these things, you're still going to have to do it sort of primitively. So that's why I have these zone locations on it. So you can see here, this is the column mark, and then I have that row mark. So it's kind of the small things in this. And when I used to be an applications engineer for SolidWorks Electrical, when I'd have discussions, like pre-sales discussions with potential customers, it would be like, oh, well, like, you know, I like my drafting tool. Why should we pick your drafting tool? And my favorite part about this is any 2D drafting tool, it's going to be kind of the same. But the cool thing about this is anything you put on the page is captured inside of a database that's underneath the tool. And that all that information can be pulled out, providing you little productivity improvements like this. It can give you automatic bills of materials, wireless, all of that. So it's on the surface, it is a 2D drafting tool, but that database that it's built on top of is so phenomenal. It changed my life for sure. Okay, so now that I've nerded out about that, we're now on the other sheet of my project. And you can see here, you know, it's pretty simple. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a couple more devices. I have an ECU here. Typically, when I'm designing something for my company, we'll typically have pilot versions of things, co-pilot versions of things. So I'm going to add a couple more ECUs. I'm going to add connectors to it, kind of show you different tips and tricks I use of adding dynamic connectors. I'm going to wire things up, and I'm going to show you how I use different reports that I've built into this and different design rule checks. So you're in for a wild ride. One of the things that I do here, I'm going to scoot this around so I can see. So I'm not sure, I'm sure anyone who's actually used SolidWorks Electrical to any degree knows that over here on the left-hand side, we have not only our page layout view like we have here, but there's also a list of components. I really love kind of navigating things by components as well, depending on kind of the different mindset I'm in when I'm designing something. I'll switch between not only looking at it by sheets, but also by components. So currently I have my components list. So if I expand this, you can see every component that's in my project currently. I also, I like to do sort of a tiered structure, like a parent-child relationship for components. So over here, I have this black box called console. So if I can read, I can see it right here. What I like to do is I like to have a parent component called console, and any connectors that are attached to that console, I do as child components. So here you'll see that there's a connector nested underneath it. And I do that to kind of keep things organized. A lot of the time, I'll have, you know, 10 or 20 different connectors called P1. And so this gives it some uniqueness that I should only have one single connector that's called console P1. So I'll show you how I do that. And that really like cleans everything up for me so I can navigate it easier in the future. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a new component over here called pilot ECU. And I'm going to do this as a black box because, again, I like doing the parent-child sort of structure. So I'm going to draw it by going up to my schematic tab up at the top and go to the Insert Black Box tool. Most of the tools in SolidWorks are going to remember the different, like the last symbol that you used of this type. I have some pretty simple black box symbols set up that it has a component mark up at the top here where it says ECU, and then I have a cross-reference mark in the upper right-hand corner. And I do that because I probably have this ECU in any number of different sheets, and this will show me where else in my project I also have that. So I've just made a custom black box symbol in order to do that. All right, so I'm going to draw a new black box symbol here in order to create a pilot ECU. My number one tip when I used to do trainings on these is always remember that you have your snap grids turned on. So you know, I assume most everybody know this, but in case there's one person out there that doesn't know the importance of like grids and snaps, if you go to this lower right-hand corner and right-click on any one of these buttons, this will bring up your drawing parameters. And here you can set your snap spacing and your grid spacing. So the grid spacing is just a visual guide of, that's kind of the dots that you'll see on my drawing that I have on there. Hopefully those are coming through the screen share. So these are just visual, like you could set it to be any number that you want. I typically will have my grid set up twice as big as my snap spacing. And the snap spacing is actually, if you see here, when I'm trying to draw something, you'll see that my cursor is only snapping to specific points on the screen. And that's really what I'm looking for here. I don't want to be able to have total freeform drawing because this isn't an art project. I need this to look professional. So I have this set in at 1/4 inch intervals so that I can really line things up very cleanly and it can look professional when I'm done drawing it. So you always want to make sure that when you're drawing something, you turn these babies on. That'll keep everything in line. And it's like the #1 most important thing that I would teach in an electrical class typically. So here you can see that I'm just going to place this thing here. I'm going to draw my box however big I feel like it. I typically, where I'm working, I name a lot of things manually. There is automatic naming that'll give it a unique mark automatically, but I do a lot of things manually at my current job. So I switch it to manual mode. I say pilot ECU. I'll usually give it this component some description. A lot of the time it's the same as the name there. And I'm just going to hit OK on that currently. There's a lot of different workflows you can do with it, but a lot of the time I just want to get a symbol on the page and then move on. And then a lot of the time when I'm drawing this stuff, I'll come back and give this ECU the part number that we decided on. A lot of the time in my workflow, we proceed with drawing something without knowing precisely which part numbers we're using in our design yet. So, and I'll show you kind of variations on that workflow. But here I just draw that pilot ECU box, and you can see here there's no cross-reference in the upper right-hand corner. That's because this page is the only page that this ECU appears on, so it doesn't have any other locations it shows up on. Okay, whew, that was so much work there, so much talking to get one rectangle on the page. All right, so since I drew it inside of this orange box here, so I'm not sure if you guys noticed this, but I have an orange dashed box here. That's what's called a location outline, and those correspond to these locations over here in the components tree. These are important because I can subdivide different physical locations that I have in my design and show it here on the page. That's typically a pretty standard thing, but it's really nice to be able to do that. You can do sub-locations. So if I had like a center console inside of the cockpit or something, I could add new locations and sub-locations inside of there. But since I drew it inside of that box, this black box already knows he's in the cockpit because I drew him that way. You can put locations on the page after you've put components on the page, and it will ask you if you want to reorganize them after you've drawn them. So those are really, really cool. That's also important to keep in mind because you can get a bill of materials broken down by different locations as well. It's a very powerful tool inside of here. So this thing lives inside of the cockpit. With harnessing, everyone I've ever seen who's done harnessing uses a lot of connectors. So there's a special tool inside of SOLIDWORKS that's called Insert Connector. It's what I would refer to as the dynamic connector tool. And what's important about this is instead of having a static symbol that has a preset amount of connection points on it, this allows you to put in a varying number of connection points. And it'll be a little clearer as we go along, but a lot of the time when I'm designing something, I'll use a connector, but I won't use every single pin on that connector every single time. So I'm only using like 10 out of 15 pins. And so this gives you a lot of flexibility in showing a symbol with a varying amount of pins on it. So I'm going to show you one way of doing this. So kind of the out of the box way is if I want to do a new connector for this project, I can go to the schematic tab up at the top and go to insert connector. And here it's going to be like, hey, do you want to insert a brand new connector, or do you want to continue inserting pins for an existing connector already in your project? In this case, I want to insert a brand new connector because that's what I want to do in this case. Sorry, I'm getting water. So I'm going to create a new connector. What it's going to ask me for is it's immediately going to this manufacturer part selection window. So anyone who's used this tool will know that you'll see a variation on this type of interface throughout different areas of the software. And it's kind of weird as like a new user because I'm like, well, this is kind of overwhelming. There's all of these things in it. But kind of the breakdown of each of these is there's a classification tab, which will allow you to kind of browse. It's like a catalog where you're like, hey, do I want, let's go to the shoes section of this catalog, see what type of shoes are here. The filters tab is going to eventually give you the same information, but it's really if you come into this tool with a plan. So when I'm shoe shopping, for example, I can go to the DSW website or something, and I can specify exactly what I'm looking for. Like, hey, I'm looking for a connector part number. I'm like, hey, I need a connector part number. I need to make sure it's in my company's library because these are the pre-approved part numbers that we're allowed to use that have been set up for me. And I'm saying that have been set up for me. I've set them up for myself. So past Kate has set these up for myself. And then you can go and see like what manufacturer, if you know exactly who makes it, or if you know the part number that you're going to use, you can type in all of this information and it'll give you, it'll update this window for you. Something that I mentioned before is a lot of the time I'll be designing something and we haven't completely nailed down the precise part numbers that we're using. So one of the things I've done is I've created a to be determined part number. Look at me, I didn't put it in the right spot. I was going to be determined. The reason I made this part number is it allows me to create a dynamic connector symbol and put it on the page. And then when I actually get the part number I need, I can swap it out without having to redraw the whole symbol. And I'll show you how that works. But here I've created a to be determined part number that has 100 miscellaneous pins. I probably should make a larger one. I've encountered times I needed a larger one. So I'll select this one in this case because I'm pretending that I don't actually know what part number I'm going to use for this design. So I'm selecting that. You really only need one part number here. It needs to have connection points in it in order to draw a dynamic connector symbol. Here it's allowing me to name this thing. I'm just going to call it P something, and I'm going to call it a plug for a description. I'm going to click OK. So the next thing that happens inside of this dynamic connector tool is over here on the left-hand side. Let's see, I need to move this guy again. Over here on the left-hand side, it's holding my hand and walking me through the steps I need to decide in order to draw this dynamic connector symbol. So what you can see on my mouse cursor is currently there's a symbol floating on my cursor that is quite large. By default, it's trying to insert all 100 pins. There's a configuration that I've developed that's telling it like what spacing on each connection point. So like I'm going to have a connection point every 1/4 of an inch. It's telling me how wide this connector symbol is. So you can have different ones. I made it pretty obvious to myself that I need to choose this one. You can dictate if you want rounded corners for plugs or rectangular corners for jacks. You can, if you're going to have this showing up on multiple pages, you can put a zigzag on it so that we know that it continues onto another page. In this case, I know I'm only going to use a couple pins. And then down here, it's asking me which circuits I want to draw for this thing. So you could go and try to deselect a bunch of them manually, but I do have 100 pins on there. So a tip that I'd recommend is if you click this limit number of circuits button, it will deselect all of them except one. And then if you try to go click stuff, you'll be like, why isn't this working? Am I insane? That's because this filter is only limiting you to be able to select one pin at a time. You could increase that number if you'd be like, hey, I need to select 10 pins. Don't let me select more than that. You could do that. Or you could just click it again and turn it off, and they're still deselected, but then you have freedom to select multiple ones at a time. Usually you'd be a little bit more thoughtful about which pins you're selecting, but since this thing's not going to work anyways, doesn't matter. You can use these arrows to reorder pins. So if you, typically all of my drawings have out of order pins on them so that I can make it look nice and neat. As you can see here, there's a bunch of things that are not straight up in order. I had a customer call it cable salad when you had all of these wires crossing over each other, and I thought that was a really fun phrase. So I'm trying to avoid cable salad and have them all nice and neat and straight across as much as possible. So you can shuffle these things around in order to make that happen. Obviously, probably with more thought than I'm doing. And you can put this thing on the page. Oh, there's also symbol orientation. So you can select different orientations. It's also tied to your space bar. So if you press space bar, you can rotate it around. I'm going to place this thing on the page by left clicking. And you can see here, it put all of those pins on the page. Excuse me, I've got to blow my nose for a second. I just had the COVID, so give me a second.
You're doing good.
I appreciate that. Okay, so here I have certain pins on the page, and you can see it says to be determined. If I all of a sudden decide that, hey, I know which part number I'm using for this connector now, I can go in at any point, double click on that connector, go to my manufacturer parts and circuits page. I can delete that part number out of here, and then I can go search for the one I actually want to use. So I have a part number written down for myself. 8B. This is the hardest part of the whole thing, is having to be able to read my own handwriting on my notepad, which is, you can see I didn't do it great. It's because I put a dash and not a slash. This is why I need a tool like this to check myself before I wreck myself. Okay, so I have this part number here that I decided I want to use instead. What you'll notice, kind of in order to get this to work correctly, is you need to have the terminal types be the same. So I have set up all of my connection points to be miscellaneous to allow to do this. But when I pre-select something, it will show me all of these green boxes for terminals that are on the page. And I have blue boxes for terminals that are in the part number, but not yet on the page. What we really want to avoid is any red boxes, unless you want red boxes. But red boxes mean that that terminal is on the page, but is not satisfied by a terminal in the connector part number. So I'm selecting this thing, hitting select, hitting OK. And you can see now for my configuration, I have the part number shown at the top. It swapped those things out. It kept it in order. It was a very useful trick that I was proud of myself when I made it. So I have that on the page. Over here on this console, I'm going to add a new, oh, wait, I can't get too ahead of myself. So the way I inserted this connector part number over here is he currently, P1, and sometimes I'll get kind of confused in my own list over here, and I'll wonder where this P1 is in my list. So sometimes what I do when I get too lost in my own project is if I right click on a symbol on the page and click go to and go to the go to browser, it'll open something up for me. So what I can see here is now this connector's down here in this other location. And I want to reorganize that to make sure he is a child of my pilot ECU. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop him onto my pilot ECU that's up here. And just by doing that, this now knows he's a child component of this pilot ECU. And it's really as simple as that, which is kind of neat that now these two are associated with each other just by a drag and drop like that. Hold up. Okay, sorry. Getting over all that sickness. Okay, and if I decide I needed to drag this around to a different component, I can just do that by dragging and dropping him in another component. So pretty easy. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in a new component over here on this console, and I'm going to show you a different way that I would do that. So over here is I have this console black box. And if I want to put a new connector in it and predefine that he is a child component of that black box, I right click on the component in the components list. I'll go to this new flyout and select the connector part number. Here I get to define a new component before it's even on the page. So what I'll do is I'm just going to call it P something again. And since this is a different component, he's calling himself P2. I can predefine a manufacturer part at this point. So I go to the Manufacturer Parts and Circuits tab, remove those filters. I look for that same part number again. Really should have just copied it on my clipboard because I'm the worst at reading. Okay. Okay, so I'm using that same part number there, adding him to my list, and then checking out with that. So what I did there is I predefined that that connector is already a part of that parent component, and that kind of keeps me organized before I do something kind of silly like I did before where I forgot that I didn't put him next to his parent. So I'm going to insert, in order to insert a symbol for that connector, I can right click on him inside of that tree and say insert connector. I can predefine saying, okay, I want, and I'm just going to start winging this. I don't remember exactly how many pins I inserted. I'm going to go with some. Little short. Oh yeah, that's beautiful almost. Okay, cool. So I put in some amount of pins. I'm going to flip this thing around with my space bar and put that thing on the page there. So I have a new connector over here on the other side. I don't have to remember to tie him to his parent because of the way I inserted him. I can insert wires. So inserting wires, you can go to the schematic tab and do draw single wire. But what I've done is what you can see here in this little like pop-up next to my cursor, I have mapped a keyboard command to the W key so that when I press W, it'll start this draw single wire command. This is a super useful thing that I didn't learn about until way too late in my career. There you can put in shortcuts in electrical. I'm sure there's some video or article about it. Kind of the quick way I'm going to run through is this little arrow right up here between the title and then like all these other buttons I never remember to use. If you click the little drop down arrow and go down to more commands, there is a keyboard tab, and each one of the tabs that are available to you right here have a drop down. So if I go to schematic and click on draw single wire, I could type in W to assign a new key command. It will tell you like, hey, is this, hey, there is a shortcut already assigned with this command. And if I click yes, then it's going to overwrite that, and this will be the only command that has that shortcut. So I like doing that because it saves me a lot of time. I don't do it for a ton of things, but I have it for like move, wire, line, a couple of them, rotate. Here, I'm just going to draw some wires. I have kind of small selection of things. I do have ones that are generic that will flag in one of my design rule checks if I still have that on the page at the end of a design. But I'm just going to design some stuff right here. I don't really remember how many wires I need. Too many wires, I'll go through and delete them. The other cool thing about electrical is I love the fact that the connection points trim the wires for me, so that when I finish drawing something like this, you can see the ones that actually landed on connection points trimmed themselves, and that's honestly my favorite thing. And if they don't trim themselves and you think they should, it's usually because you're not on your snap grid for some reason. They should trim themselves if there's a valid connection point, and if they don't, then the database straight up does not know that they're connected. So that's I usually always overdraw my wires in order to avoid doing something like that. Okay, and I'm going to quickly kind of show you how I turn this into a harness drawing. I'm going to fly here a little bit, but if you guys want to see anything in a little bit more detail, I'm happy to show you. But here I'm just going to, what I typically do is I'll do a box select to copy the things I know that I'm going to use in my drawing. And I like to do a copy with an insertion point so I know exactly where my cursor is going to be when I paste it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my projects manager. I'm going to spin up a new harness drawing. You can have different templates. So I have two that are slightly similar, but I'm going to go with this template one. You can call it whatever. I'll call it webinar. I actually have to click in the box in order to type stuff. Okay. And so this is going to come in with my predefined sort of standards of how I want most drawings to come in. It'll come in with my cover page and the notes and the different things that I like having in it, my drawing standards. It can come predefined with different parts. But here I have a schematic page. I'm going to paste this thing on the page, and I like to do a paste special when I'm doing this. So this is going to keep any component names, any wire numbers, if I had numbered them. All the information from when I copied it, it's going to stay the same by doing this paste special. You can see here I got a few things up at the top, some notes there I need to delete. Again, I want to just make sure I'm on grid here, so I have my snap grids turned on. And then I'm going to paste this thing. I usually do it at the bottom, actually. And then here, I always set all my actions to keeping the existing settings. These are kind of fun to play through if you have time to see their different functionalities, but I want everything to be identical to the way that it was. So that stuff comes through. I just kind of have to resize this guy because he's much too tall. And I can resize that. How I do harness drawings in 2D without having using the 3D add-in is I will actually go use my components list again. Gotta move this guy, just wrestling with him. And I will insert an additional symbol. So I'm doing on the P1 side. I've had it set up so that the manufacturer part that I selected pre-selects the correct 2D harness flattened symbol for me. So that's kind of a cool thing. You can sort of pre-design which symbols that you need. So I can put that on the page, and he's associated with that Pilot ECU P1 connector. And then the same thing over here. Don't need that guy. It's not part of the size. And I can insert a symbol. And again, that manufacturer parts knows that he needs to pick this symbol for this 2D representation. And then I'll draw some lines on it and be like, hey, this is a wire. I've got some other sweet tricks for like labels and all sorts of stuff. And then, so this is kind of a quick version. oops, that's the wrong button.
Hey,
Then
Kate,
kind of,
we're at 11:50.
yeah,
We went
I'm
a
just,
little time for Q&A. I just thought I'd let
yeah,
you know.
yeah, I'm
Okay.
just going to spin up these reports and then Q&A. So
Thank
literally 30
you.
more seconds. I get long-winded, but so at this point, I have predefined custom reports that I need for every harness drawing. That includes a parts list, a kind of a individual breakout of different wires, a list of labels, and a wire list. So I'm just going to generate all of those real fast. And so it's going to look at my project and be like, hey, we're going to format these the way that you requested them before. And reports are by far my favorite thing. I've got an old parts list in there and an old wire list. Okay. So here it's giving me a parts list, including wire types, because I've customized that. Of all of the parts that I have in there, I can see that there's a couple pieces of missing information I need to go back and fix. But it's actually giving me all of this information for those components. It's giving me a breakout with a total list of wire types. So if I had multiple different wire types, it would have different breakout tables. And then I have like a to from list of all the wires I have on there. And again, customize, it's telling me where it's starting from, which pin it's going to, and all of that. And okay, that was a real fast version of what I do every day, all day. So that's it. Mic
That was
drop.
wonderful. That was wonderful, Kate. Thank you very much. Hey, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions before we get to the audience question.
Okay.
What's your advice to those in the audience that maybe decided to go with SOLIDWORKS Electrical and they're initiating their first seat? Do you have any quick advice for them?
My biggest piece of advice as somebody who just got SOLIDWORKS Electrical is when you're installing it, definitely get your VAR to help you install that, because it is kind of a complicated install. And then if this is your first time using SOLIDWORKS Electrical, get training on it, because it is a very powerful tool, but it's very different than what any tool I had used prior to this because of the database that's on the back end of it. It was not the most intuitive tool when I first started out, but once I understood what it was looking for after I did training, I was really stoked on it. So my attitude really changed after I did training.
So thanks for that. I'm going to fire another one at you.
All right, I'm ready.
How are you managing your electrical data?
So as far as how I do it is we have our different installations for each different computer. What we will do is we back everything up with PDM. So weekly, I probably should do it more often. I do an archive of the entire environment, which includes all of my symbols, projects, title blocks, everything. And I store that inside of PDM. And then each project, whenever I'm done with it for the day or just done with it, I will archive that project and store it in PDM. So I have a whole workflow processy document that I chose to do that. But I do store all of this stuff in PDM because then we get different versions and stuff of it. So if we change something that should not have been changed, we can go back to a different state and time.
Huh. Yeah, thank you for that. That's
Yeah,
pretty
you're
clear and concise. I'm going to throw one more at you. JP, do we have a lot of questions?
Oh man, do we have questions? I have been, my fingers are on fire with trying to answer these questions on the back end here.
Nice.
Let me answer the first one for you. Yes, this webinar is being recorded. Yes, you will receive a copy of this webinar tomorrow. Usually, so it started 1 p.m. Eastern, so typically you will see an email go out about 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. And for Kate and for Mike, that would be what is that, noon for you guys, right? So, oh no, what time is it there? 10 a.m. for you guys out that way. Yeah. So that's the first one. Second one is, the big question is importing parts. I got a lot of questions about importing the information that they might already have, whether it's in a spreadsheet or they have the data on the graphic representation of their symbols and stuff.
Yes.
What are the best ways to go about that?
My favorite way. So if I already have like existing bombs or like an Excel spreadsheet of a bunch of usually manufacturer information, one of my favorite things is on the import export tab, there's an import data button. And I'm sure there's got to be some content out there about this. But in here, this can actually go through and pick up your kind of develop your manufacturer library from an Excel spreadsheet. The two things you must have is the manufacturer listed on each line, and then the part number on each line, and then there's whatever else you want to have included. So that'll get you kind of the line items, and then there's you'll have to add in the circuits and terminals for that with this method. I know you guys do have an electrical content portal.
Yeah, the ECP or electrical content portal. Yep.
You can download stuff on there. Sometimes you do have to make your own.
One thing to add to this,
things.
Kate, on here is that you can see where it says no configuration, right? So for the folks, a lot of people are asking about the parts. So if your spreadsheet is set up in a certain manner, however you've set that up, you essentially have to map it that first time. You're going to say column A is reference number, which is your part number. Column 2 is going to be the manufacturer. Once you set that up and you build this, you can save that configuration to say, this is my company X, wherever I'm coming from, this is my configuration. So the next time I need to import things, I don't have to remap everything all the time. Right. So it's easy to it's not hard to get this in. So it's just, a lot of people think it's hard to get my information in, whether it's graphic representation or the data behind this. Just wanted to point that out in that regard.
Yeah, and with graphics, a lot of the time, if you have a DWG version of a symbol, you can paste that straight into your symbol library. I mean, then you have to add attributes and all sorts of things, but it's really
and
the drawing.
If this seems overwhelming, the resellers that you work with, that we work with, that I talk to every day, there's a few on this call right now listening to me, is they have services to help you import it. So if you have a ridiculously large library that you already use, then talk to us. We can help you get that stuff into the tool.
Yeah, I used to have to make libraries of stuff for people, and yeah, I would do that. That was all my job.
All right, let me ask another question here. I don't think you have it built in there yet. Can this connect to PDM and also manage? You can give the short answer. If you don't, I can answer that as well.
Yeah, we did used to use the PDM integration add-in. I just don't have the add-in activated because we kind of went to a more manual way because I work remotely. My company's in Utah, which is why my computer's probably confusing. So there is an add-in that does check things, back things up, creates virtual parts and stuff. I haven't used manage in context with this, so you're going to have to answer that question.
Yeah, so I'm actually working with a company right now that is trying to set up PDM. Well, they already have PDM and manage set up, and they're trying to connect electrical so that they can show the information, certain attributes about their components in the electrical side inside of PDM as well as manage. So it is possible. It just would need to have, we would essentially have to have a meeting to talk about, what information do you want? How do you want that information displayed? And we can map that, because it is a mapping process between those. It's essentially, database to database, table to table, and making sure that information is getting across from one tool to the other to the third, right? So, and back and forth.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, good question.
All right, let's see if we got one more. We got a minute here. I think I answered this one, but let's see here. Back to the child connections, the parent-child relationship stuff. Can that information be shown on your bill of materials?
Yes, sure. I mean, it kind of depends on your bill of materials, the way you have it set up, but yeah, if you look at my wire list, for example, you can see here it says pilot ECU colon P1. So it's picking up the parent component. I just had it format a colon in there, and then it's picking up the child component. So yeah, you can definitely set it up that way. I think the out-of-the-box bombs already have that functionality. My company's bombs, we don't even put the component marks for on our bomb, but yeah, you can certainly do that.
All right. And I think we're over now, but let's see if we can add one more. Christine's probably getting mad at me on the back end here saying, but
We're running
trying to add,
along.
there was a lot of questions. So a lot of regarding the libraries, it's really, it's not that bad. It really is not bad in regards to the libraries. You know, you put it in once, it's there,
Yeah,
right?
forever.
It's not going anywhere. Yes, if you're coming from another tool that you already have a huge library, then we can help you pull that in. It's not that bad.
No.
These configuration tool, they map all that stuff for you, you know, and symbols are the other one, right? If you have symbols, now it all depends on how you built that symbol in the other tool and what you want to do with it. But there's also the electrical content portal, which we didn't show on here, is a website that you can go to, and there's over 100 million parts on that website that you can pull information from and pull it down into SOLIDWORKS Electrical. It's a simple zip file that you would unarchive in this, unzip into this program. So if you need help with that, let us know. We can talk you through it, help you out. I've got videos, whatever it may be, that we can go through this stuff. So
And speaking to that, when I came on to this company a year ago, they had electrical, but they were not using it well at all. So I essentially had to start from scratch and create all the manufacturer parts, all the symbols, all of the templates. And now, even 3 to 4 months after I started on, like, I very rarely have to create anything new. We're constantly using those parts that are already in our library. We already have most of the symbols for the type of stuff that we use. So there is like a bit of a learning type curve at the beginning, but now it really flies because I already have all of that stuff developed. All of my other colleagues that use it, they didn't have to create it. I just gave them my stuff.
yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm looking at a comment here. You know, it's a very complex system. It's if you've used other schematic capture tools, this is nothing compared to some of them like ridiculously overwhelming complex tools that are out there. The user interface, they've designed it to make it a lot easier to find what you're looking for, find the command you're trying to do, and use at that point in time. And again, the reseller can help and guide you and make sure you're successful. That's what we're here for. We want to make sure that you're successful with this tool. It's not we're not going to just sell it to you and just move on with our lives. It's not what we're there for. So anyway, Mike, do you have anything else? Because I know we're coming over the end here.
I'm just gonna walk us out here.
Thank you, Kate. I'm gonna hang on. I'm gonna mute myself now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kate. That was really enlightening. It's nice to see a real user use it. It's the demo candy. So the reason that people buy SOLIDWORKS electrical is because you can reuse the data like Kate was talking about. And you have really nice coordinated change management. So you change, it's parametric based. So you change one thing one place, and as she demonstrated, it flows throughout the whole project. We didn't get in. I had some DRC questions for you. We'll have to maybe do a follow-up webinar with you.
Oh yeah, heck yeah, love
those. Design review checks are there, and you've got, because it's SQL, you can do custom reports to your heart's delight, especially what's out of the box. And one thing I want to mention real quickly before we terminate the call, we have hands-on test drives that JP Emmanuel leads currently, and this is so you can get up and running and use the software in a controlled environment without all that the setup time. So it's a lot better than throwing and saying, I want an evaluation unit. We're not really doing you a favor by giving it to you, but we're trying to be respectful of your time by doing a hands-on test drive. And if you want to do something like that, just reach out to us. You can type in question box test drive, and we'll get back to you and see when you want to schedule it. And here's the famous QR codes that I mentioned. So the one on the left brings you to our electrical page. The one on the right, I encourage you to take a look at it. It's Introduction to electrical schematic designer. It's our new cloud connected product, and it's a nice review of that. So without further ado, Kate, I want to thank you very, very much for doing this with us. And
Thank you.
and JP, thank you. I know you got a roll, so it's over and out.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.